This is the excerpt from Cider with Rosie by Laurie Lee about, as they would call it, cowl barking. The week before Christmas, when the snow seemed to lie thickest, was the moment for carol singing. And when I think back to those nights, it is to the crunch of snow and to the lights of the lanterns on it. Carol singing in my village was a special tithe for the boys. The girls had little to do with it. Like haymaking, blackberrying, stone clearing and wishing people a happy Easter, it was one of our seasonal perks. By instinct we knew just when to begin it. A day too soon and we should have been unwelcome. A day too late and we should have received lean looks from people whose bounty was already exhausted. When the true moment came, exactly balanced, we recognized it and were ready. So as soon as the wood had been stacked in the oven to dry for the morning fire, we put on our scarves and went out through the streets, calling loudly between our hands, till the various boys who knew the signal ran out from their houses to join us. One by one they came stumbling over the snow, swinging their lanterns around their heads, shouting and coughing horribly. Coming cowl barking then? We were the church choir, so no answer was necessary. For a year we had praised the Lord out of key, and as a reward for this service, on top of the outing, we now had the right to visit all the big houses, to sing our carols and collect our tribute. 8 of us set out that night. There was Sixpence the tanner, who had never sung in his life. He just worked his mouth in church. The brothers Horace and Boney, who were always fighting everybody and always getting the worst of it. Clergy Green, the preaching maniac, Walt the bully, and my 2 brothers, and me. As we went down the lane, other boys from other villages were already about the hills, bawling King Wenchlush, and shouting through keyholes, knock on the knocker, ring at the bell, give us a penny for singing so well. They weren't an approved charity as we were, the choir, but competition was in the air. Our first call, as usual, was the home of the squire, and we trooped nervously down the drive. For light we had candles in marmalade jars suspended on loops of string, and they threw pale gleams on the towering snowdrifts that stood on each side of the drive. A blizzard was blowing, but we were well wrapped up, with army puttees on our legs, woolen hats on our heads, and several scarves around our ears. As we approached the big house across its white silent lawns, we too grew respectfully silent. The lake nearby was stiff and black, the waterfall frozen and still. We arranged ourselves, shuffling around the big front door, then knocked and announced the choir. A maid bore the tidings of our arrival away into the echoing distances of the house, and while we waited we cleared our throats noisily. Then she came back, and the door was left ajar for us, and we were bidden to begin. We brought no music. The carols were in our heads. Let's give 'em Wild Shepherds, said Jack. We began in confusion, plunging into a wreckage of keys, of different words and tempo. But we gathered our strength. He who sang loudest took the rest of us with him, and the carol took shape, if not sweetness. This huge stone house with its ivied walls was always a mystery to us. What were those gables, those rooms and attics, those narrow windows veiled by the cedar trees? As we sang Wild Shepherds, we craned our necks aping into the lamp-lit hall which we had never entered, staring at the muskets and untenanted chairs, the great tapestries furred by dust, until suddenly, on the stairs, we saw the old squire himself standing and listening, with his head on one side. He didn't move until we'd finished. Then suddenly he tottered towards us, dropped 2 coins into our box with a trembling hand, scratched his name in the book we carried, gave us each a long look with his moist blind eyes, then turned away in silence. As though released from a spell, we took a few sedate steps, then broke into a run for the gate. We didn't stop till we were out of the grounds. Impatient, at least, to discover the extent of his bounty, we squatted by the cow sheds, held our lanterns over the book, and saw that he had written 2 shillings. This was quite a good start. No one of any worth in the district would dare to give us less than the squire. So, with money in the box, we pushed on up the valley, pouring scorn on each other's performance. Confident now, we began to consider our quality and whether one cowl was not better suited to us than another. Horace, Walt said, shouldn't sing at all. His voice was beginning to break. Horace disputed this, and there was a brief token battle. They fought as they walked, kicking up divots of snow. Then they forgot it, and Horace still sang. Steadily we walked the length of the valley, going from house to house, visiting the lesser and the greater gentry, the farmers, the doctors, the merchants, the majors, and other exalted persons. It was freezing hard and blowing too, yet not for our eyes and mouths, soaked through our puttees, yet not for a moment did we feel the cold. The snow blew in our faces, into our eyes and mouths, soaked through our puttees, got into our boots and dripped from our woolen caps. But we did not care. The collecting box grew heavier, and the list of names in the book longer and more extravagant, each trying to outdo the other. Mile after mile we went, fighting against the wind, falling into snowdrifts, and navigating by the lights of the houses. And yet we never saw our audience. We called at house after house. We sang in courtyards and porches, outside windows, or in damp gloom of hallways. We heard voices from hidden rooms. We smelt rich clothes and strange hot food. We saw maids bearing in dishes or carrying away coffee cups. We received nuts, cakes, figs, preserved ginger, dates, cough drops, and money. But we never once saw our patrons. We sang as if it were at the castle walls, and apart from the squire, who had shown himself to prove that he was still alive, we never expected it otherwise. As the night drew on, there was trouble with Boney. Noel, for instance, had a rousing harmony which Boney persisted in singing and singing flat. The others forbade him to sing at all, and Boney said he would fight us. Picking himself up, he agreed we were right. Then he disappeared altogether. He just turned away and walked into the snow, and wouldn't answer when we called him back. Much later, as we reached a far point up the valley, somebody said, "Hark!" and we stopped to listen. Far away across the fields, from the distant village, came the sound of a frail voice singing Noel, and singing it flat. it was bony, branching out on his own. We approached our last house high up on the hill, the place of Joseph the farmer. For him we had chosen a special carol which was about the other Joseph, so that we always felt that singing it added a spicy cheek to the night. A spicy cheek to the night. The last stretch of country to reach his farm was perhaps the most difficult of all. In these rough, bare lanes, open to all winds, sheep were buried and wagons lost. Huddled together, we tramped in one another's footsteps. Powdered snow blew into our screwed-up eyes. The candles burnt low. Some blew out altogether, and we talked loudly above the gale. Crossing at last the frozen mill stream, whose wheel in summer still turned a barren mechanism, we climbed up to Joseph's farm. Sheltered by trees, warm on its bed of snow, it seemed always to be like this. As always, it was late. As always, this was our final call. The snow had a fine crust upon it, and the old trees sparkled like tinsel. We grouped ourselves round the farmhouse porch. The sky cleared, and broad streams of stars ran down over the valley and away to Wales. On Slad's white slopes, seen through the black sticks of its woods, some red lamps still burned in the windows. Everything was quiet. Everywhere there was the faint crackling silence of the winter night. We started singing, and we were all moved by the words and the sudden trueness of our voices. Pure, very clear, and breathless, we sang. As Joseph was a-walking, he heard an angel sing, "This night shall be the birth time of Christ, the heavenly King. He neither shall be born in housen nor in hell, not in a place of paradise, but in an ox's stall." And 2,000 Christmases became real to us then. The houses, the halls, the places of paradise had all been visited. The stars were bright to guide the kings through the snow, and across the farmyard we could hear the beasts in their stalls. We were given roast apples and hot mince pies. In our nostrils were spices like myrrh, and in our wooden box, as we headed back for the village, there were golden gifts for all. And Slad is a small village where Laurie Lee lived as a child, and it's not so far from here, about 15 miles towards Stroud, Gloucestershire, England, which is about 100 miles away from London, towards Wales, which in turn is about 20-25 miles away. So I hope you enjoyed that reading from Laurie Lee's Cider with Rosie. Yeah.